Sudan is one of Africa's most important and most troubled countries. Located in northeast Africa, it sits between the Arab world, the Horn of Africa, the Sahel, and the Nile Valley. Its borders touch Egypt, Libya, Chad, the Central African Republic, South Sudan, Ethiopia, Eritrea, and the Red Sea. With more than 51 million people and an area of nearly 1.9 million square kilometers, Sudan is Africa's third-largest country by land. Its capital, Khartoum, lies where the Blue Nile and White Nile meet, making the city both geographically symbolic and politically central. But Sudan is not just a place on a map. It is a country shaped by ancient kingdoms, colonial rule, religious divides, military regimes, economic hardship, and repeated wars over identity, power, and survival. To understand Sudan, geography matters. Much of the country is dry, with desert and semi-desert landscapes dominating the north and central regions. The Nile is therefore more than a river, it is a lifeline. For thousands of years, communities settled along its banks, using its waters for farming, trade, transport, and political power. Sudan's position also made it a crossroads. To the north was Egypt and the Mediterranean world. To the east was the Red Sea, linking Africa to Arabia. To the west were Sahelian trade routes, and to the south were regions with different climates, cultures, and religions. This geography created connection, but also tension. Sudan became a meeting point of African, Arab, Islamic, Christian, and indigenous traditions, and those layers would later become central to its politics. The land now called Sudan has one of the deepest human histories in the world. Archaeological cultures such as the Cormusan, Halfan, Sibyllian, and Caddan developed in the region tens of thousands of years ago. Around 11,500 BC, the site of Jebel Sahaba recorded what is often described as the earliest known war in human history, showing that organized violence has very ancient roots in the Nile Valley. Later, settled cultures emerged, including the A-group culture and the Kingdom of Kerma. Kerma became one of Africa's earliest major states, wealthy from trade, agriculture, and control of Nile routes. This early Sudanese history is often overshadowed by Egypt, but it was not simply a footnote to Egyptian civilization. It was a powerful world of its own. One of Sudan's greatest ancient civilizations was the Kingdom of Kush. After centuries of interaction, rivalry, and conflict with Egypt, Kush rose as a major power in the Nile Valley. At times, Kushite rulers even controlled Egypt, creating a dynasty that linked the two lands under Nubian kings. Later, the kingdom's center shifted southward, and cities such as Meroe became famous for pyramids, iron production, and long-distance trade. When Kush declined around the 4th century AD, it did not leave an empty space. Nubian Christian kingdoms emerged, including Nobatia, Makuria, and Alodia. These kingdoms lasted for centuries, showing that medieval Sudan was not isolated or primitive, but part of a wider world of religion, diplomacy, and commerce stretching across Africa and the Middle East. From the 14th and 15th centuries onward, much of Sudan changed through migration, trade, and religious transformation. Arab nomads gradually settled across large parts of the country, and Islam spread more deeply into society. This process was not a single invasion or sudden conversion, but a long historical shift involving intermarriage, language, scholarship, trade networks, and local political alliances. By the 16th century, central and eastern Sudan were dominated by the Funj Sultanate, while Darfur developed its own powerful state in the west. Ottoman influence appeared in the east. These different centers of authority meant Sudan was never a simple, unified political space. It was a mosaic of regions, identities, and rulers, held together at times by trade and religion, but often divided by distance and power. In the 19th century, Sudan entered a new and violent phase. Egypt, ruled by the Muhammad Ali dynasty, conquered Sudan and tried to control its resources, people, and strategic position. Egyptian rule brought taxation, military pressure, and resentment. Out of this anger came the Mahdiist uprising, a religious and nationalist revolt led by Muhammad Ahmad, who declared himself the Mahdi, a messianic figure in Islamic belief. His forces captured Khartoum in 1885 and created a state that challenged foreign domination. But the Mahdiist state was eventually defeated by a joint Egyptian-British military force. In 1899, Sudan became an Anglo-Egyptian condominium. Officially, Egypt and Britain shared sovereignty. In practice, Britain held the real power and governed Sudan as a colonial possession. Colonial rule left deep marks on Sudan. British administrators governed different regions in different ways, especially separating the largely Muslim and Arabic-speaking north from the south, where many communities followed Christianity or traditional religions. This reinforced divisions that had already existed but gave them new political weight. Education, administration, and economic development were uneven, often favoring some regions over others. Meanwhile, Sudanese nationalism grew, shaped by debates over whether Sudan should be tied to Egypt or become fully independent. The Egyptian Revolution of 1952 helped change the situation. Muhammad Naguib, Egypt's first president and himself connected to Sudan through family and upbringing, supported Sudanese independence. On January 1, 1956, Sudan became an independent state. But independence arrived before a stable national agreement had been built. Almost immediately, Sudan faced the question that would haunt it for decades: what kind of country should it be? Power was concentrated in the north, while many Southerners felt excluded from government, development, and national identity. The First Sudanese Civil War began even before formal independence, in 1955, and lasted until 1972. It was rooted in fears that the South would be dominated politically, culturally, and religiously by the North. A peace agreement eventually gave the South some autonomy, but the underlying issues remained unresolved. The later rule of Ghaffar Nimiri intensified the crisis, especially when Islamist policies expanded and Sharia law was introduced in 1983. For many in the South, this confirmed that the state was being defined in a way that did not include them. The Second Civil War became one of the longest and deadliest conflicts in modern African history. Government forces, increasingly influenced by Islamist politics, fought southern rebels, especially the Sudan People's Liberation Army, or SPLA. But the war was not only about religion. It was also about oil, land, language, political power, and who had the right to define Sudan's future. Millions were displaced, and entire communities were devastated. After years of pressure and negotiation, a peace process led to a referendum in the south. In 2011, South Sudan became independent. Sudan lost a large part of its territory and much of its oil wealth. Before the split, Sudan had been Africa's largest country by area. Afterward, it became a smaller state still burdened by old conflicts. While the North-South conflict dominated international attention, another catastrophe unfolded in Darfur, in western Sudan. Beginning in 2003, rebellion against the central government was met with extreme violence. The regime of Omar al-Bashir and allied militias were accused of mass killings, ethnic persecution, and genocide. Villages were destroyed, civilians were targeted, and millions were displaced. Estimates suggest that hundreds of thousands of people were killed during the wider period of violence and repression. Darfur exposed the brutal methods of Bashir's state, using military force, militia networks, and divide-and-rule tactics to crush dissent. It also showed that Sudan's crisis was not only a North versus South story. Marginalized regions across the country were demanding power, protection, and recognition from a deeply centralized state. Omar al-Bashir ruled Sudan from 1989 to 2019 after taking power in a military coup. His regime, backed by the National Congress Party, combined military rule, Islamist politics, and tight control over public life. Sudan faced international sanctions, isolation, and accusations of supporting terrorism. Inside the country, political opponents, minorities, journalists, and activists faced repression. The economy struggled under conflict, sanctions, corruption, and the loss of oil revenue after South Sudan's independence. By 2018, rising prices and hardship helped trigger mass protests. Demonstrators demanded not just cheaper bread, but the end of Bashir's entire system. In April 2019, the military removed and imprisoned him. For many Sudanese, it was a moment of hope. But removing one ruler did not dismantle the forces that had sustained decades of authoritarian rule. Today, Sudan is again at war. Since 2023, fighting has raged between the Sudanese Armed Forces, known as the SAF, and the Rapid Support Forces, or RSF, a powerful paramilitary force that grew out of Sudan's violent security landscape. This is often described as Sudan's third civil war, but it is also a battle between rival armed elites for control of the state. Khartoum, once the political heart of the country, has become a battlefield. Civilians have suffered displacement, hunger, insecurity, and collapsing services. Sudan is among the poorest countries in the world, with more than 60% of its population living in poverty, and its economy still depends heavily on agriculture. Yet Sudan is not defined only by tragedy. Its people carry a history of ancient civilizations, resistance, revolution, and survival. The central question remains whether Sudan can transform from a battlefield of competing powers into a state that serves all its regions and communities. If you found this helpful, please like this video and subscribe for more explainers.